Hi, my name is John Kuperman. I'm a web developer at Adobe, and for the last 12 years I've been working on making large applications accessible. I'm really excited for this course where I'll show you what accessibility is, all the amazing ways people with disabilities use the web, and what we can do as developers to make their experience as good as possible. We'll talk about focus management, color contrast, how to audit your site for accessibility issues. We'll dive into the history of the web and how it was created to be accessible, and we'll even talk about the standards bodies responsible for keeping it that way. I really hope you enjoy the course. I often find that for folks that don't know a ton about accessibility but are just getting started, that alt text is one of the most popular things people hear about when they think about accessibility. And we talked about it a little bit before, but the idea here being that when a screen reader encounters an image, by default, if you just have image source, foo.jpg, it'll read the file's name to the user, trying to be helpful. So this is kind of nice sometimes if you name your images properly, like if you have one that's cute puppy.jpg, then it'll read that out loud. But it gets really tricky with websites that allow users to upload their own images, right? So if you run a web app like that, you always have to come up with unique names so there's not collisions. So you end up doing things like hashing these images. So I pulled some examples from Flickr, Facebook, and Twitter that can show how bad things can get, right? So these are all, of course, understandable that they would give these unique, number and string names to the images, but just imagine being on a screen reader and you're tabbing through or something like that, and it says, image of 1724289, just starts reading this stuff, or even worse, this this Facebook one, which is a PHP file with a bunch of stuff at it. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. So adding an alt attribute to these will cause the screen reader to read whatever you put in the alt text instead of the file name. So here's an example here of an image with a really long kind of hashed file name, but we say a puppy in the park. When the screen reader hits that, it'll just say a puppy in the park. It won't read that name. And then the other thing to keep in mind, so if you have an image and you made that image, you're uploading it, add alt text yourself, something descriptive. Remember, you don't need to say a picture of, because the screen reader will do that. It'll tell you it's an image, so just say what's in it. However, back to the users uploading stuff, there's going to be a lot of times building web apps where you don't know what's in the picture when you're coding, right? So if a user can upload a picture to Facebook, Facebook doesn't know what that picture is going to be. And so those times, if you don't know what the picture is, you have kind of two options. One, you can put something in something generic, user uploaded content or something like that. Or two, you can put in an empty alt text. So this is different than no alt text. So alt with an empty string will cause the screen reader to skip over it, not reading it at all. This is also really valuable if you have images that are decorative. Say you're making a website with some really nice rounded corners that are pictures like PNGs or something like that. Putting an empty alt on those will make sure screen readers just totally ignore them and know that they're decorative images. And then the last thing with alt text, which we talked about a little bit before, is SEO. So search engine engineers also really want in on that alt text, because search engines crawl that alt text and use it to help rank your site for whatever keywords you're looking for. And so for years, SEO shops have been stuffing keywords into that. So again, you'll upload a picture of a family at the beach, but your blog post is about saving money on car insurance. And so the whole alt text will say, hey, save money on car insurance, instead of a family at the beach. And it's just a little bit helpful for your SEO, but really difficult for accessible screen reader users. So I would really encourage folks, I know Google has devalued the ranking of this alt text over the years, to still do the appropriate alternative text. I also think that there's ways that you can kind of settle both. I'm often thinking when I'm writing blogs, a marketing blog or whatever, it's well, I need it to be descriptive, right? It has to work for screen reader users, but I think you can also kind of move the words around to, maybe a family at the beach having just saved money on car insurance. I don't know, something like that, right? That you can do for everybody. But I would say the big priority would be making sure that it reads well for screen readers. But this is one area where there might be a little bit of bumpiness at your company. Again, looking at the WebAIM recommendation from the last section, just covering what we've just covered here. So there's only one conformance level. It says images, form image buttons, and image maps need alt text. Images that don't convey content should have an empty alt text like we covered. And equivalent alternatives to complex images are provided in text, which we didn't really cover, but if you have something that you need that is very vital for the blog post or the page that you're on, one solution that you can do is you can have the image empty alt text. So that is hidden from screen readers, but visible to sighted users, right? And then right underneath it, you can have a div with some content in it, but make it visually hidden. So that is visible to the screen reader, but hidden from visioned users. I'm going to pause that one, make sure it makes sense. So you can basically do the opposite approaches. You can have an image that you hide from screen readers and then some text that you hide from non-screen readers. So I linked here to the official ARIA documentation on MDN. So it stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Again, I think one thing that I just love about accessibility, and I always hesitate using this word, but it feels easy in some ways where like you get to learn this cool stuff, and oftentimes it's just adding attributes to HTML. It just feels very doable to me. Like I feel like sometimes you learn like a performance technique or a caching strategy, and you get all excited, and then you're like, okay, but how do I apply this to my application, right? Like things get complicated very quickly. A lot of this stuff is really cool because I mean, really a lot of the time it is just going into your HTML or going into your JSX or whatever and just adding some of these attributes, and then boom, you see this massive difference in how people interact with your site. So this is the ARIA page I would recommend kind of getting started with. We've already talked about some of these things, right? We've seen ARIA label and we've seen role, which are both part of ARIA, but there's a lot more to it. So let's cover that a little bit. For those that like spec reading, there's also the W3 spec with ARIA. So all of these things are like well supported on browsers. All of these things have official W3 support. You can kind of go through here and see all these different properties like we were just talking about. Has pop-up or hide something, keyboard shortcuts, we've seen label. We'll get into a lot of these other ones pretty soon. Expanded, you know, all these different great things. So the spec is pretty cool. Although when you click into them, it's very deep. So I don't often like mess around with that too much. But it's really cool to see. So one thing I wanted to talk about is labels. So we covered the label tag in HTML, and it's great. But we also covered the shortcoming, which is that it only works with labelable elements. And so ARIA provides us with 3 different tools that we can use, although 2 of them do the same thing, for all this added context. And this ties in great with the question about should you add labels to links and things like that. So we have ARIA label, ARIA labeled by, and ARIA described by. ARIA label and ARIA labeled by do the same exact thing. They add a label to something. The difference is that the label is inline, right? So if I hop back over to the code, ARIA label works like this. So you find the element that you want, you give it an ARIA label of anything that you want. The way that ARIA labeled by works, it's kind of like label with its for or its implicit, right? Is that you could do like a div with an ID of foo, and you could be like this, GitHub page for repository, the same thing. And then here you could do ARIA labeled by, and then you would just link to that ID. So foo. So this is like very similar to you can and I mean, it's just kind of handy. If you have a big old description, you maybe don't want to put it in an attribute. So you put it here, although you'd probably also then want to do class equals visually hidden, right? If you were doing it here. Although sometimes it works out really nicely where you have a big paragraph about what the button does, and then you have your button, and it's just really nice to link the 2 of them together. But you have a lot of flexibility here. So you can do an inline label, you can do a separate label with labeled by, and then lastly, you can do ARIA described by. And this gets into some of the more complex situations. So a question that I always get is like, what's the difference between labeled by and described by? So the label is essential information about the thing. Like, what is the button? What does it do? Description can provide extended information that the user might need. So here's like another example. We had that great question about what if you have a button and the button submits a form, but after it submits the form, it does a redirect. So we talked quickly about roles, which we'll get into next. The other thing that you could do is you could label the button submit form, and then you could describe by the button after this form submits, you'll be redirected to the home page, logged in, something like that, right? So even more ways that we can communicate with the screen reader. Any questions about labels and describe by? Awesome. I will say for sure that like it has been my job before to go into existing code bases and just add a bunch of labels and descriptions, which is like a pretty nice and easy kind of going thing to do. And then the feedback has been really stellar from people that rely on it. So again, it's like small changes that can have really big impact here, just kind of adding some labels and descriptions. Another thing that we've done is like internationalized the labels and descriptions, right? That's like another cool thing. So if you use some kind of internationalization library, instead of doing these inline labels, you can switch to labeled by and described by and just wrap it in your internationalization library. Get those strings translated so that folks using screen readers who speak different languages can get access to all that information too.
Maybe this is a silly question, but when you have more than a couple of labels or described bys, they'll read from left to right.
Yeah, when you have, I see. When you have a couple of labels or described bys, yeah, they'll read left to right or top to bottom, like first come first serve order for sure. So the concept here being like, imagine that you have a button that makes a modal, and let's just say as an example, it's like a login screen or something like that. So you click on the button and a modal opens up, and the modal has like a form to fill in or something like that. So as a keyboard only user, if I keep tabbing through to kind of see what's going on, it'll tab me to the index or to the input and the other input and the submit button. If I keep tabbing, it'll tab me to this button, again to this button. But if I hit tab again, you can see it focuses me all the way back out here. And if I keep tabbing, it's actually going to start focusing on the web page in the background. Again, keeping in mind that while for all intents and purposes, it looks like the screen is blacked out, that's just CSS doing that. Like the page is still open. And so what can happen here is that keyboard-only users can very easily get themselves totally out of the modal. And if they don't have vision, then they don't even have any indication that they've left the modal. So they're like kind of browsing the website when the modal is the only thing interactable. So the idea with tab trapping is a JavaScript technique where you grab the first tabbable element in a modal and you grab the last tabbable element in a modal, and then you listen for like a key down event. And if they're on the last element hitting tab, you focus them on the first element. And if they're on the first element hitting shift tab, then you focus them on the last element. And so basically you're kind of using a lot of those techniques that we learned, like storing active elements, calling .focus on them, listening to key down events. We're sort of using all of those together to create this experience of really being on a modal. So the keyboard only users feel the same way that non-keyboard only users feel. Does that make sense at a high level? Like tab trapping, keeping users kind of locked into this modal or trapped into this modal? Great. So for like an example here, the modal that I'm using, let me see, focus management. So I just went online and I found some modal library. It's not my recommendation. It's just a library I found called Tingle. It creates this modal, so it sets the content to a big string here of HTML. And then it adds like these footer buttons. This is just their demo, like right off their website, basically. So then I have a button here. For those that do a lot of JS development, is just get element by ID, the button. So when the button is clicked, we call modal.open. And so what we'll want to do here is we'll want to basically grab the first element, which I can see is like this input, and we'll want to grab the last element, which is like this footer button here, which again, if we go back over to the website, the first element should be first name, and the last element should be dangerous action. And then we'll want to put our listener in, basically, right? So I went ahead and did it, and I just want to work through the code together on it, just so we can see again. Learning like the JavaScript technique is not really the important thing. I just want people to be comfortable with. The concept. So what I did here is I hard coded two things. So I hard coded the class of first on this one, and the class of last on this one. A better way to do it would be to use that focusable library that I showed that has a big string. And then you could do document query selector all that focusable string, which will give you an array of focusable items. And then you could access the zeroth and the length to get the first and last on that array. That would be very dynamic. So if people added more things to the modal or took away things, they would always work. But for this kind of short example, I just manually added a class. Hey, this is the first element. Hey, this is the last element. And then I grabbed both of those into variables here. So we've got the first element is the one with the class of first, last element, class of last. And then really all I did here is add a single event listener for the key down event. And we just look and say, hey, if the key hit was tab or the key code of tab, then we go into this if. We say if we're shifting, meaning we're moving backward, and the currently active element is the first element. So if we're on the first element trying to go backward, then we take the last element, we call focus on it. Otherwise, so we're not shifting, we're going forward. If the current active element is the last element, meaning we're at the end trying to go further, then we call focus on the first element and prevent default. So again, it gets like a little bit messy. A lot of modules will do this for you if you're using Bootstrap or some other JavaScript library. But I did kind of want to give folks a chance to like understand the concept and then just see some of the code for a simple implementation of it. So yeah, so we can kind of see this. One thing I like about tab trapping is that it basically combines everything that we've been talking about so far. So it's like listening to certain key codes. It involves active element. It involves calling .focus. All sorts of things like that. Again, I would recommend if you're doing this in production to not like hard code the first and last as classes, but just grab a list of all queryable elements. But yeah, other than that, pretty straightforward.